you want me to start? Fine. Okay. All righty. Good evening, and welcome to the Sustainability and Infrastructure Commission meeting for Wednesday, September 14th, 2022. I am calling the meeting to order. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Cookie, could you please call roll? And Chair Robbins is absent and excused.
Commissioner Narita?
Here.
Commissioner Lorraine?
Here.
Vice Chair Rowinski?
Here.
And Commissioner Michael?
Okay, great. The city offers the public two ways to participate, in person and virtual. For people who are present in the chamber, there are three ways to sign up to speak to the commission. One is to complete the yellow request slip found in front of the chamber and return to our clerk, Cookie. The second is to sign in using the iPad at the back of the chamber or scan the QR code located on the sign found in the back of the chamber. For people who are joining us virtually, there's two ways from which to speak to the commission. One is to click on to the Zoom link found on the top of the page of tonight's agenda. Use the raise your hand button to be called on by Cookie. The other way for people to join us virtually is by phone. Call 408-638-0968, 408-638-0968, and enter conference ID 8808 75 86 19 0. Once again, 8808 75 86 19 0, and enter the passcode 930104. Once again, 930104, and then press the hash or pound sign. Press *9 to raise your hand to be called on, and when called upon, press *6 to unmute to speak to the commission. Regardless of the method that you choose to speak to us tonight, when called upon, please let us know who you are and provide your comments. Individual speakers will have 3 minutes to speak. For those joining us by video, there will be a 3-minute timer in the upper left-hand corner of your screen. For those commenting by phone, Cookie will inform you when your 3 minutes has expired. So with that, we're going to go to our next agenda item, which is the consent calendar. There is one item, and that is to approve the minutes from the regular commission meeting of August 10th, 2022. I will abstain because I was not present at the August meeting. Do I have a motion, or do I have questions? Any changes to the meetings, questions, comments?
I move to approve the minutes.
Seconded.
Okay. Cookie, roll call vote?
Commissioner Narita?
Yes.
Commissioner Lorraine?
Yes.
Commissioner Rowinski?
Absent. I was not present. Yeah.
Commissioner Michael? Okay. We don't have a quorum, but
Okay.
I'll put it.
All right. I guess it will have to be in probably the October meeting. Okay. All right. The next item on our agenda is the public comment for people wishing to comment on an item that is not appearing on tonight's agenda. State law prevents the commission from acting on any matter not on the agenda. However, comments are welcomed, and the staff and the commissioner will take note of them and consider them for future commission meetings. Cookie, do we have any speakers?
I have no speakers and I have no one showing on remote.
Okay. All right. Okay. Seeing no speakers, I will conclude the public comment section of this meeting and move into the next business section. There is one item under new business, and that is an update from staff on the city's efforts to convert the city's vehicle fleet to all electric. No motion by the commission is needed for this informational agenda item. We will begin with a presentation from Azalea Mitch, our Director of Public Works for the city. Azalea's presentation will be followed by questions from the commission, and then I will move the meeting to for comments from the public to the commission, either made by in-person, video, or phone. Once all the public comments have been heard, I'll bring the discussion back to the commission for any final questions and then comments. So, Azalea, the floor is yours.
Great. Good evening, commissioners. Can you see the slides? Just double checking. Great. Well, this is an overview of our green fleet planning efforts. And we will start by reviewing our council's priorities, why emissions from our fleet matter, regulations, both current and pending, as well as an overview of our transition plan and feedback that we will need from you all. As you are aware, every year our city council embarks on a strategic planning session. This is called the Blue Sky Session, and we have many priorities that really land in public works, one of them being evaluating our green fleet. In 2021, the priority was to evaluate what path to take. In 2022, that priority became much more action-focused, and it was changed to implement a green fleet by 2030. I know there's a lot on the slide, so I'll just be general. But for the record, why are emissions from fleet important? In terms of defining mobile sources, the EPA defines both as including on-road vehicles as well as non-road vehicles. It's important to note that there are certain vehicles that are not regulated by the state, but rather by the federal government, and those include aircraft, trains, and ships. So in terms of looking at the state of California and emissions, the greatest contributor to emissions of pollutants and greenhouse gases do include these mobile sources. 50%, they represent 50% of the statewide greenhouse gas emissions, 80% of what contributes to the depletion of the ozone layer. And specifically, medium and heavy-duty vehicles make up a significant percentage of both greenhouse gas emissions as well as emissions of NOx. And this is significantly important because medium and heavy-duty vehicles are actually represent a very small number of the total number of vehicles registered in California. So these are pie charts that just show from, in terms of mobile sources, what we are looking at with respect to light duty, medium duty, heavy duty, and greenhouse gas emissions, as well as NOx. And as you all know, nitrogen oxides are important because they deplete the ozone layer, and greenhouse gases are important because they contribute to the warming of our planet. So why are mobile sources important to the city of San Mateo? Our fleet makeup, we own and drive 189 vehicles with a value of $10 million. Police has the most number of vehicles, followed by Public Works. And Public Works and Parks, we have the majority of trucks, and Police has a majority of SUVs and the largest variety. As you are aware, some of our fleet runs on compressed natural gas, CNG. We have about 20 vehicles that run on CNG. We have some electric vehicles. Those are mostly associated with parking enforcement, as well as some small utility vehicles like carts, golf carts. We do have some hybrid vehicles, and we've got quite a backlog of vehicles. We've got over 40 that are overdue for replacement, 88 that should be replaced by 2026, and an additional 41 by 2030. And the reason why this is important is because the decisions that we make in the next few years will be very critical to that transition plan. So in terms of regulations, as you all may be very well aware, Governor Newsom passed a zero emission by 2035 executive order. So this calls for the elimination of new internal combustion passenger vehicles by 2035. So that means that everything sold in the state needs to be a ZEV. There is a transition plan in terms of looking beyond 2035 as it relates to heavy-duty vehicles and also off-road equipment. So how will Governor Newsom's executive order be implemented? The California Air Resources Board takes a key role in determining that transition plan. So just last month, the CARB adopted the Advanced Clean Cars Regulation. So this really focuses on being able to very rapidly to meet that 2035 deadline, implementing a strategy that will help us reach that objective. It's a two-pronged approach. One, they amended the ZEV regulations so that it requires an increasing number of vehicles that should be on the market. It also amends the low-emission vehicle regulations, so that means there's a focus on those vehicles where there is currently, the technology is not quite there, but for those vehicles to be more stringent with respect to emissions, so that there's a plan to reach that 100% electrification by 2035. California, being the most populous state in the nation, obviously has the largest market. So California represents 16% of the new vehicles sold in California are already zero emission or plug-in hybrids. So this graph shows CARB's plan for making sure that by 2035, it's a transition plan that will help us reach that 100% goal. So that was the regulation that was just adopted last month. Now there is a proposed clean fleet rule that specifically focuses on cities, counties, special districts, and state agencies. So we fall under this proposed rule where we would be required to purchase 50% of the vehicles purchased in the next 2 years for them to be zero emission vehicles, and then 100% or newer models by 2027. This is a bit more aggressive than the plan for the rest of the state, but there's definitely a focus on what we can do as public agencies. Key to note as well is that as we transition, plug-in hybrids do count the same as ZEVs. However, compressed natural vehicles are not considered a ZEV under this proposed rule. There will be a hearing next month, and we will have to wait and see if this rule gets adopted. So the state's strategy has pretty significant, the strategy really focuses on achieving significant reduction in emissions, both on the NOx and GHG side, but also on the particulate matter. As you can see from this graph, we are the 66 to 82% in reductions in these emissions is pretty ambitious. And these are definitely necessary for us to be able to reach the goal of carbon neutrality by 2045. So what is carbon neutrality, you might ask yourself. You might already know. But we've got a big challenge ahead of us in terms of limiting the global warming by the 1.5 degrees that the IPCC has talked about for quite a while. And that means that for us to reach this goal, we need to be carbon neutral by the mid-21st century. And this target was also part of the Paris Agreement that was signed by many, many countries. As you may know, the US did not participate in that Paris Agreement until last year when President Biden did officially sign that. So our California strategy is really focused on helping us reach this goal by 2045. So what does this mean to the city in terms of our contribution? The next few slides will lay out our draft transition plan. As you all know, we do have a compressed natural gas facility that we've been operating at the wastewater treatment plant since 2016. This takes the biogas that's produced, cleans it, compresses it, so that it is a fuel that can be used for vehicles. We invested quite a lot of money into this facility and also received a grant. The intent was to fuel not only our vehicles, but also to allow for the potential sale of this gas to third parties. Unfortunately, since 2016, we've been unable to find entities to purchase this gas. And so we've been spending a lot of money operating and maintaining this facility while not really capturing the return that was expected. We've also had quite a few operational challenges. The equipment is difficult to operate, to maintain. Because the facility is located at the wastewater plant, our vehicles have to drive to the plant to fuel and come back. So there's actually a loss of production and time, and so it's been costly and challenging for us. In 2021, we presented options to our city council, and they directed us to begin decommissioning the facility. So we have 20 vehicles that we will have to fuel elsewhere, and the plan is to address that loss of time as it relates to just fueling 20 vehicles. So we are currently in the process of planning to decommission the plant. So one of the questions that has come up, we do produce 100 cubic feet per minute of gas, and so that is a fuel source. And the plan is for us to look at ways either to produce electricity or to clean that gas and put it back into PG&E's natural gas grid. The plan is to issue a request for proposals to get a consultant on board to help us assess what options we have. And if we can offset some electricity, as you all know, the wastewater treatment plant consumes a lot of energy. We've been in the process of expanding it. The electrical consumption is going to increase. So this would definitely help us offset some of that increased need. However, we have to look to see what is the most feasible and viable option. So that process will begin next year. One of the changes that we made last year was also to transition to a better fuel source. So we have quite a few vehicles that use diesel, and we changed our contract so that we're now purchasing renewable diesel so that runs our existing fleet as well as our generators. So renewable diesel is not biodiesel, just to let you know. It actually follows a different process, and it can be used interchangeably with traditional-based diesel. So the change for us was very quick, and from a price perspective, it was the same. So we will be using all diesel equipment in vehicles, including like our sweepers, our vacons, as well as equipment such as backhoes, tractors, and our generators. So I liked this figure because it shows that we do have options, not only with respect to our fleet, but also even as we fly, right? So renewable diesel is chemically the same as petroleum diesel. It is made from vegetable oils, animal fats, recycled restaurant grease. It just follows a different process, and we don't see the clogging that you may see when using biodiesel. That's been one of our biggest concerns with vehicles as well as generators. And it's been interesting also, if you fly, to see that some airlines are actually marketing the use of sustainable aviation fuel. So a lot more options on the market now. So in terms of expected reductions in emissions from the use of renewable fuel, it varies, but in comparison to gasoline and diesel, we are expecting to see a 40 to 50% reduction in greenhouse gases by switching to this fuel. So next on our transition plan, obviously, as we look at our backlog and we look at the future replacement needs, our purchasing opportunities really depend on what is available, what's on the market. So we just currently issued a purchasing contract for hybrid SUVs for PD. And every time we have a vehicle that we need to replace, we look at what options we have. We've also been exploring options for our larger equipment, such as electric sweepers. And we've been in contact, for example, here with the city of Fremont. They've been piloting the use of Teslas for their police force. Obviously, as we begin to evaluate converting to electric vehicles, one of the transition plan pieces that will become very critical is to assess our charging needs. I don't know if you are familiar, but level 2 chargers are actually rather simple to install, so the installation is not necessarily the challenge, it's more the management and the assessment on PG&E's side in order for them to be able to meet the increased electrical needs from charging. So some of the things that we have been looking at, it's not only what options are there for electric vehicles, but how do we use our vehicles? Most of the vehicles that we drive, there's an average of 25 miles per day, and that really varies per department. So part of the charging assessment will consider how often do we need to charge a vehicle if we're only driving them 25 miles a day. And then also, from response need, obviously PD being first responders, we will need to assess their charging needs because those vehicles will always need to be charged and ready. So that assessment will take into account needs per department as well in order to determine the number of charging stations that we will need at our facilities. We've also been meeting with PG&E. They have an electrical vehicle program where they assess the infrastructure needs from their utility assets to our meter. There are incentives that they provide if we show that there's a need at a site to charge 25 vehicles, and that we commit to a 10-year time frame in order to maintain that electrical equipment. So we are looking into the process of applying for these rebates. So in terms of costs, you might ask yourselves, how costly will this transition plan mean to the city? If we look at vehicle costs, just vehicle costs, we're not really looking at a huge delta. Obviously, the numbers have changed in terms of supply chain challenges, but vehicle costs will not have we don't see a significant increase in costs, specifically because of the state's executive order and also the availability with all these vehicle manufacturers in terms of the types of EVs that will be on the market. What we do have to assess, obviously, and cost out are the infrastructure needs, both from what PG&E, what they will require in terms of making sure that we can charge our vehicles, to then the needs on our city facilities. So in summary, we have already switched to renewable diesel, which is decreasing our greenhouse gas emissions. We are looking at maximizing the purchase of electric vehicles as they come on the market and based on our replacement needs. We will be looking at assessing the infrastructure needs for that electrical charging and really assessing the operational needs based on each department. We are seeking grant opportunities. We will look at potentially implementing a biogas energy project at the treatment plant. And we also need to focus on making sure that the fueling of those 20 CNG vehicles doesn't really, that we address the issues with the loss of productivity there in terms of our staff and services. And with that, I'm happy to take your questions, your feedback.
Thank you, Azalea. So once again, we'll go to questions from the commission, then we'll go out to the public and come back with any final questions and then final comments. So Commissioner Narita, we'll start with you.
Great, thank you. And thank you, Director Mitch, for that great presentation. Really appreciate it. Okay, so I have a couple questions for you. Let's start with like the renewable diesel part. So you mentioned for these more heavy duty vehicles, the renewable diesel is a great option, and that looks really promising. But there's still 40 to 50% GHGs that are not reduced, right, through the use of renewable diesel. And so would the idea be to use renewable diesel to extend the life of existing vehicles until like all electric or other plug-in hybrid backhoes come onto the market? Is that kind of the long-term strategy there?
Exactly. So the short-term strategy was, wow, there's this other fuel that's available. Let's start using that now. Let's start reducing greenhouse gas emissions right now, as we then evaluate what electric vehicle options we will have in the future, specifically for these larger heavy-duty vehicles that we use.
And I mean, depending on the proposed rule, the California proposed rule says like 2027 is the deadline for 100%, but I assume there's a caveat there about whatever's available
Exactly.
on the market.
It's where feasible.
Okay, great. And then I was also curious about just to get really clear on the numbers. You mentioned that there were 40 vehicles on backlog, 88 that needed to be replaced in 2026, and 41 that needed to be replaced by 2030. So that I just did the math of adding those up together, and that's 169 vehicles, right? Of the 189 vehicles in our fleet. And do you anticipate fleet growth at all, or is the steady state 189 is kind of the goal? We're just doing a replacement rate.
Right now, we would increase the number of vehicles if we were adding a lot of staff to our personnel. We are increasing the number of employees at the treatment plant, but that will not translate into additional vehicles because they will be at one facility. So indeed, the plan right now is not to add vehicles, but that 189 is currently a steady number.
That's a huge amount of vehicles to replace in 8 years.
So we have PD, so police, we replace them every 5 years.
Oh,
Every
okay,
other
that's
vehicle
like a
is 10.
protocol. Okay.
Exactly. Yes.
Okay. And then to that end, I was curious about other strategies to potentially create some cost savings across cities. Joint purchasing agreements have been really popular for things like electric buses across transportation authorities nationwide, I know, but I was just curious if there's like a police car joint purchasing, initiative somewhere, because it seems like the police especially, that those cars are not complex. They're SUVs or they're sedans. They just need to be bought en masse, and we know the cycle time. And so I was just curious if there are other strategies like that you've heard of across the state or even across the nation to, bulk purchase them, if you will, with other cities.
So we have not explored bulk purchasing. However, in terms of costs, we do rely on a national bidding process. So we actually don't go out to bid when we purchase these vehicles. We can use the overall national bidding process, so it actually enables us to buy them as quickly as possible. So that saves us time. the recent challenges has been the fact that things have been on back order for a long time.
And that's like a global supply
It's a-
chain issue in general.
It is. We are getting hit with that global supply chain issue.
Okay, yep. And everyone wants an electric vehicle, which is fabulous. Okay, great. And then I was also curious to better understand the charging infrastructure challenges or limitations that you were talking about. Could you just expand a little bit more about that? Like, is it that there's concern that the grid infrastructure, like at a police station, would become overwhelmed potentially by the electric vehicle charging load?
Exactly. So
Okay.
if you think, I like using water, right? If we have a heat wave, people do tend to use a lot more water. I know that we use electricity as well, but that's why how we operate our vehicles matters, so that we can make sure those peaks are not exacerbated. We can actually, there's a lot out there that we can take a look at. How charged our vehicles, take advantage of off-peak hours for charging, make sure that we stagger them so that we're not charging at once. So how much we drive and what we need will become important in terms of designing our infrastructure so that it is also achievable, so that we're not looking at charging every vehicle at once, that we actually take a more practical approach.
And are there any thoughts on, like, in that design or in that timeline of that design, are there things about potentially like solar, like local solar being used to offset some of the new demand? And are those things being considered in a design process?
I think we should. I think we should definitely look at on-site generation. The biogas example is being one of them, being able to produce on-site. The treatment plant will have a solar array as part of the new administration building. We can definitely assess we are looking at solar panels for police, and we can certainly look to see what can be done at City Hall.
That's great. And then along the lines of the CNG plant, you mentioned that there's going to be an RFP at some point to figure out those next steps for the CNG plant. At some point next year, then, would that plan be presented to the commission?
Yes. In terms of options, yes.
Okay, great. Those are all my questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Lorraine?
Thank you. Azalea, since staff went to council to discuss options last year related to the fleet, we've had this Inflation Reduction Act pass and another very large surplus budget in the state of California, and continued interest in putting some of those funds toward electric vehicles and infrastructure. I'm curious to know whether there might be an opportunity for some of what is being proposed to be funded through state funds or federal grants and applications.
Absolutely. We've been very busy looking at grants. I think what we, presenting to you is important, because this is the framework of our transition plan. I think the challenging piece is really defining the infrastructure needs, and the plan there is to get a consultant to help us determine those. So once we have that ready, I think we'll be able to apply to grants. We are reaching out to Peninsula Clean Energy because they have programs, and like I said, we did meet with PG&E to take a look at their rebate program. But indeed, we are exploring grant options in this realm, as well as grade separations. We submitted a grant a few months ago and are submitting another one next month. And then bicycle improvements, as you know.
Thank you. Those are my questions.
Commissioner Michael?
Thank you. I wanted to mention the idea of a joint partnership for bulk purchasing, because I like that idea, because I think a lot of cities are our exact same position and will be, looking for how to transition their green fleet. And then I was just curious, where is the CNG facility where the vehicles can charge? Because it sounds like it's quite a distance.
It's at the treatment plant, so
Oh.
2050 Detroit Drive, close to the bridge.
No, I mean, that's the one that's decommissioning, right? So where would they go to fuel
Oh,
instead?
so we have options, San Carlos, yes, so San Carlos and Belmont.
Got it. Thank you.
All right, I have a few questions here. During the last heat wave, my neighborhood lost electricity. So my question is, with everyone moving towards electric, we get into some very hot days for a prolonged period of time. You're unable to charge the cars, recharge the cars via electricity. And that becomes particularly a problem, I think, for PD cars. So how is that going to be managed?
So we have.
That's a risk.
Absolutely. That is a risk. We actually have that risk right now at the corporation yard. We have our fueling station, and when we lose power, we cannot fuel. So we have a generator that we plug in to make sure that fueling station is operable.
Right.
So we would look at the same thing. Do we, in terms of being able to charge, what additional generation capacity do we need? So that would be relying on our emergency generators to be able to give us that ability to charge.
Right. And so the generators are probably gas-powered?
They're
Right.
diesel
Yep.
powered.
Uh,
Yes.
Okay. So anyway, because that is a big risk, and I think it could be inevitable as everybody's hopping on the electricity bandwagon.
Absolutely. That's why it is important to understand how we use our fleet. And I think it can seem insurmountable when you think about transitioning and having 189 vehicles. We need to note that, so I'll give you an example, right? Nowadays, so the Teslas that the city of Fremont has been pilot testing, they can run on, their charge is 250 miles. So if you're on average driving 25 miles, then that's quite a few days of battery life. So it makes it more reachable in terms of how we should be making sure when to charge, the day, the time, so that we're not charging all at once and so that we are able also to respond.
Yeah, it's going to be complicated. And what do you think about the cost of electricity versus fuel of the fleet? Talking to people who have electric cars, they have told me that their household electricity has skyrocketed, that bill. So I'm going to assume that the city's electrical bill is also going to skyrocket as well.
That's why charging management is critical, and being able to make sure that we're not charging during peak hours. So we have 2 electric vehicles at home, and we do not plug them in between 4 p.m. and 9 p.m. because the rates increase significantly during that
Is it
time.
the 4 to 9? Okay.
So part of that is managing our our charging system.
Right.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and that's the current. I mean, it could change. And based on colleagues who have electric, they also don't charge between that period, but their electric bill is still skyrocketing. I think electricity is just much more expensive than natural gas, or in this case, gasoline. So that's also another item I would probably factor in terms of cost. It's one thing to buy something, and then it's a whole nother thing to operate it. I would probably argue maintenance of these vehicles could be more expensive. They're a more complicated car, parts, labor, all of that bit. I think so the operation is going to be more expensive than we currently have, and likewise, as we transition, the initial costs of the electric and the gas. So the initial costs are going to be greater than gas, and the operating costs are going to be greater than gas.
Commissioner Orinsky, if I may address that, the maintenance is actually lower because there's no maintenance on batteries. We would be focusing on brakes and tires.
Right.
So it's actually lower than.
Okay, we'll see that. Okay, great. Has the city thought about pre-owned buying pre-owned electric vehicles. And here's why I bring this up. I think it's a bit of, and I'm going to talk about this at comments, but if we're talking about reducing your footprint, footprint also talks about where you source. Where you source. And currently, the sourcing of these batteries come from mines that produce an enormous amount of greenhouse gases. You can go to mines in Uganda and Chile and all of that, but particularly Uganda and Africa. So I don't necessarily buy that we have carbon neutrality here, by the way. We're offshoring our carbon footprint. So thus, I think it's important, would the city consider or put an aggressive plan in together to buy pre-owned cars, or possibly buy cars, I don't know whether you can reuse batteries that go out. I mean, that is recycle batteries, a battery recycling program, but also buying initially pre-owned versus new. Have we thought about pre-owned for the argument that, like I said, you've got to look at sourcing. If you're ever going to get to carbon neutrality as outlined in the Paris Agreement, you have to look at sourcing.
So I can share that we have not, in terms of our fleet, since we keep our vehicles for 10 years. Like I said, our police vehicles are kept to have a life cycle of 5 years. So we have not looked at the availability of any pre-owned vehicles.
Right. And that might be something to consider. The pre-owned market, and then also, should batteries need to be replaced? Can we buy recycled batteries? I know Tesla's got a very embryonic program on taking back a battery, recycling it, and then selling that recycled battery. But those would be two options I think I would put in the calculus. And then finally, and I think Commissioner Narita talked about this, the discussion with PG&E to sell back our CNG gas to them, is that what I understood?
That would be one of the options evaluated.
Right, yeah, an option there. Are there other options we're looking at, or right now is it primarily with PG&E, and what to do with this CNG?
So two options, it's either actually producing electricity, so either operating a microturbine or an internal combustion engine to actually produce electricity.
At the what, wastewater treatment?
At the treatment plant, or cleaning that gas and just putting it into PG&E's grid.
Right. The first option is somewhat interesting because, if you look at it, the electricity doesn't have to travel far. And as such, when electricity travels through lines, it degrades, for lack of a better term, but it might be 100, 200 feet away, that could be actually a very potent source of electricity.
Absolutely.
I like that idea.
The assessment would obviously look at the cost effectiveness. I think there's been a challenge with operating IC engines. Microturbines have been easier to operate, and then how, in terms of offsetting electricity, how is that? How much more cost effective is that versus selling it to PG&E?
Right, and that's true. Yeah, and that is true too.
And there is an opportunity as well to optimize the amount of gas that we produce. So as you all know, we're now required to compost. And we can definitely use our digesters to take some of that organic slurry and try to see if we can produce more biogas. Right. So that would be part of the assessment as well.
Right. And as you said during Commissioner Narita's question, that information as it begins, that evaluation, which sounds like, by the way, it's a big evaluation, and we'll probably go through stages of that.
Absolutely. We'll bring that back and present, like we've done, for example, with the latest plan we've been working on with Todd Papp. We've come back a few times to give you an update and as well to present the draft plan. Okay. So we can do that.
All right. Okay, great. Let's see. At this point, I'll close down questions, and we'll start taking from the commission, and then we'll start taking questions from the public. Do we have any public speakers?
I don't see any.
Anyone by phone?
Nope.
Virtual Zoom? Nope. Okay.
No, I don't see any.
All right, well, boy, this is a first. We'll come back for questions, yeah, yep. So I will formally close out public comment. Okay, going once, twice, 3 times, all right. All right, well, then what I'll do, I'll bring us back for some final questions. I think Commissioner Lorraine might have a question here, and then final comments. Commissioner Lorraine?
Thank you, Chair. Azalea, can you maybe help me understand a little bit about the difference between, if one exists, between what you presented on these options that Chair Rowinski was going over with you related to what to do with the gas and maybe cogeneration? If I recall, I think one of your slides noted some of the heat as perhaps a byproduct, and like inferring that we may be able to take advantage of that in some way. And so I'm wondering, is cogeneration an option at the wastewater treatment plant with the gas? And is that in fact part of the plan, or
Absolutely.
could you maybe elaborate so that I can understand a little better?
Absolutely. So 2 things happen. So the biogas, depending if we decide to produce electricity, right? So the way that electricity would be produced, the product is electricity as well as heat. So we can, the assessment would look at potential capturing that heat, and we do need heat the digesters need to be hot. And so we could use that heat to keep the digesters, that activity going, because it does require heating. So the assessment is comprehensive in that sense. It's looking at energy capture, whether through the production of electricity or using the heat that's produced through the process.
Thank you.
Through the Vice Chair, sorry, I had one more question, I realized. Sure. Thank you so much. Azalea, I was curious also about, I realize, like outreach and education across city employees. I can anticipate issues of like range anxiety, right? Because that's like a known thing among electric vehicles, and like, you know, like, is there a plan for deep outreach and education? Like, are there staff? Do you have the right number of employees to do that outreach and education? Is there like partnerships that need to happen to make sure like adoption goes smoothly? Because this is a very fast timeline that we're operating under, and I would hate for like any department to kind of slow walk their progress due to misinformation when this sector is growing and the technology is growing exponentially. It's so hard to actually keep up with all the progress. Like, I didn't even know what renewable diesel was until this presentation, and I work on climate change, right? So it's really fast moving. So I was just curious if you could speak to that.
Absolutely. I can share that we actually have a lot of staff asking when these electric vehicles will, when they will be available. We had to give Ford a letter of intent to purchase on their new electric F-150s, which won't be on the market for still quite a while. But there's a lot of interest from staff, but you're absolutely right in terms of the public outreach or the internal outreach in terms of working with our staff. The key, we will need a charging management system to address issues like you said, the anxiety. I have it when I drive my Leaf. You're like, I need to make it to work. So indeed, one, the range is much higher nowadays, especially on the vehicles coming out. We will need a system that will help us manage that so that folks have a vehicle that's charged and ready to be used. And so there will be that management piece as well as the educational piece. But the great thing is there's a lot of interest from our staff.
That's awesome. And just to be clear, like, do the future budgets you're accounting for that. Like, you'll need new employees for fleet management, essentially, with this new skill set, or reskill current employees and train them, and, associated resource costs for that sort of thing. And is that accounted for in the budgets that the council has kind of envisioned? Because you have the 1.5 million for the increased cost, which is pretty good, but these other things are long-term.
So we do not, because we currently don't have the infrastructure needs. We do have a position that we haven't filled, a fleet supervisor. So that would obviously, that responsibility of making sure our fleet is charged and ready would fall under that position.
Got it. Okay.
That position is budgeted but not filled.
Great. Thank you.
Commissioner Michael?
Just one more question. So there was a slide that showed that the ZEVs are slightly more expensive than petroleum, but do you expect over operations that it would be less because, like you said, maintenance? And I think electricity is still less than gas.
It is. So if we look at the life cycle, indeed, we, from a vehicle maintenance and purchasing, we don't see that those costs going up beyond, inflation. But indeed, there are significant savings on the maintenance side. In terms of, like we were talking about charging management, there are actually a lot of affordable software systems that can help us do that. And I think the question will definitely be on the infrastructure side. And that's why I think the management piece goes hand in hand, so that we don't over-design and overbuild and make it more affordable.
Great. Thank you for all the information tonight.
Okay. All right, I'll close questions from the commission, and then we'll start with any final comments. Commissioner Rita, I'll start with you.
Great. So great presentation. Thank you so much. I just want to commend the city staff, the council, on this really ambitious plan. It's exactly what the kind of plan and the kind of thinking and implementation that we desperately need in the state of California and across the Bay Area. And I'm so excited that San Mateo is doing this. So thank you. Congratulations. It's a lot of work, but this is part of the transition that we need to have. And so I'm really proud of this area of the work, Azalea. So really great. A couple quick thoughts. I just wanted to actually reinforce Commissioner Rowinski's idea around life cycle and supply chain stuff. I think that's actually a great point about if there are certain types of used vehicles in certain settings, if the vehicle use is low and you could still get to 10 years. A lot of these electric vehicles on the used market are maybe only 2 years old because they they come from rental agencies or something, So it's not like these vehicles are necessarily very old. And I think the used vehicle market is actually growing, and with the incentive programs from the Inflation Reduction Act, this market will continue to grow. So for certain key places, I actually think that's a great idea. I also wanted to talk about the supply chain on the other side, what we do with our combustion engine cars. So one of the massive issues with electric vehicles is the concern that all of our combustion engine cars in the United States, for instance, will just go to the global south. And they'll continue to have to endure poor air quality and pollution because the combustion engine cars that are used will just go there. So how do we also how are we also mindful of how we shed our fleet and ensure that yes, you get the useful life out of these cars, but not extend it beyond something that is really unjust for other people. And so how do we facilitate that in the city and be mindful of that part on the back end? I also wanted to flag the intersection of electric vehicles and buildings. As you know, I'm a buildings person, so I nerd out on the buildings part. And the part about the solar energy, on buildings, 2 electric vehicles, solar energy on parking lots, 2 electric vehicles, all that sort of stuff, I think this is the moment when that planning and design with the consultant you mentioned to really figure this out and double down and be very ambitious on the local generation of electricity in this space, because this will also help in terms of resilience when there are massive heat waves and other disasters that will only increase in frequency. So not only would we be able to have charged cars. We could also like have, you know, other electric needs present and create more resilience in our community that way. So I think there's like multiple wins that can happen with this integration of solar and EV technologies. On the CNG plant, very excited to learn more about that. Again, I just want to be mindful of the intersection with our building decarbonization goals and strategies, right? One of the things that I know the sustainability analyst Andrea is working on is figuring out what is the, like, you know, if there's a way and a timeline and a feasibility of turning off gas. So if we port CNG gas into the grid, into the gas grid, which is one of the options, like, does that create a conflicts of interest with other goals that we have across the city for rapid building decarbonization and turning off the switch at some point? And so I feel like that RFP needs to also be done in conjunction with whatever her analysis is and whoever the consultants are who help her do that assessment, because there's a lot of intersectionality there, and we don't want to create a situation where there's conflicts in our system. And the last thing is that, you know, any additional needs that you have on outreach and education, I think this is going to be tough in the beginning, right? Insofar as making sure people understand, like, you know, we've been so conditioned for 50, 60 years to think we need oil and gas. It's been, now the New York Times just released an article today about how the oil and gas industry has proactively been greenwashing. You know, it's in today's New York Times, right? So it's a constant need for outreach and education that there are these alternative paths, and hopefully city staff would be excited to explore and understand these things, because the longer we are reliant on oil and gas and the oil and gas industry, the more susceptible we will be to, you know, not only climate change, but also all the energy security and national security issues that it brings. And so creating this local electricity and local electric vehicle fleet actually does lead at scale to, you know, creating a more democratic future, to be totally honest. And that's where I'm really excited about as well, not just the climate change benefits. So thank you.
Commissioner Lorraine, comments?
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to go after Commissioner Narita and add the obligatory, I agree with everything Commissioner Narita said. In addition, and I realize some of this may be a little bit of saying the same thing, so I'll try not to do that as much as possible. But I do overall thank staff for bringing this update and for making these decisions along with council. I do feel it's a step in the right direction. And I also think it's okay to head forward in pursuit of reducing emissions and then change course when a better direction is found, which I believe we found ourselves here. So I think it was okay for us to lead ahead on pursuing ways to use our biogas. And I think it was okay to midway through assess and realize it may not be the best plan forward and consider a better alternative. So I applaud staff and our council for not falling prey to a sunk cost fallacy, and instead, you know, actively reflect and make the decision that may be best for the future of San Mateo. Councilmember Joe Goethals recently stated in his an appreciated opinion piece for the San Mateo Daily Journal this week that the future is electric, and our city and its people have more and more opportunities to bring some of that home today. I think this is a great reflection of modeling that way with our own city and municipal infrastructure. And if I recall correctly, I think even bringing the city fleet to be green by 2030 was something Councilmember Goethals may have brought as a council priority. So I appreciate his efforts and council's efforts and staff's efforts on this. Thank you very much.
Commissioner Michael?
I don't have really much more to add, except it looks like a big goal, and it's exciting to see how it'll go, and that there's good leadership leading the way for it.
Yeah, my comments are going to be going back to buying pre-owned and using cars that have batteries that have been recycled to reduce, if we talk about injustice, what takes place in the mines around the world. I personally find it rather hypocritical, I have to be honest with you, as we talk about an electrical future, but yet 50% of the world, or there's very large parts of the developing world that produce our batteries in really wretched conditions. And I just find it a bit hypocritical. So I'm going to encourage you, Azalea, to really consider it and look at pre-owned and the use of recycled batteries. Thank you.
Thank you very much for all the feedback. We will come back to you all with our updates, and we'll look at options to make this a greener path. So thank you for the feedback.
Hopefully a greener path for all. Okay, everyone, our final agenda item tonight is reports, announcements, and meetings of interest. Anyone have anything they would like to contribute, commissioners? Okay, please.
Well, I don't mean to steal Public Works' thunder, maybe. I just want to make sure that we put in a plug for Coastal Cleanup Day, which is coming up this month. In San Mateo, we do it on the bayfront. And it is this Saturday, isn't it? Oh my goodness, yes. So it's this Saturday, very timely. September 17th, thank you very much. I believe it begins at 8 o'clock over at Ryder Park. So if you're interested, come out. It's a great time. Hopefully the weather will be good, and a good activity for families, school groups, and anyone who wants an excuse to go out by the Bay Trail and take a look at all the stuff that accumulates and feel good about being a steward of a small piece of our area there. So more information can be found at cityofsanmateo.org. Thank you.
Okay, I'll close out the reports, announcements, and meetings of interest. Our next commission meeting is October 12th, starting at 7 p.m. This meeting is now adjourned. Good night, everyone.